Infinix never stops surprising me, and this time we got a totally revamped design that's so much nicer to look and hold, and we got features you just don't see in this price range, like shoulder triggers and magnetic cooling plus wireless charging system, which is super exciting. Of course, there are a few missing features, but let's go through them and see if this is still the right phone for you. Selamat pagi, good morning everyone, Kenneth here and welcome to my review of the Infinix GT 30 Pro. Now, I'm very late to the party, but hopefully this video could still help you out. I'll be putting it to the test with maxed out Wuthering Waves, Honkai Star Rail, also Genshin and Delta Force by popular request, and I've started building my mobile phone rating section linked in description. So in the future, you can compare the phones that I reviewed, and one thing I have to say, that's going to be very exciting. Okay, so as always, everything said is my own honest opinion, and please support my work by buying through the affiliate links because it really helps me keep the channel going. And without further ado, let's get started and talk about what's new this time around, starting from the packages. This time the phone is available not only in 8 plus 256 config, also 12 plus 256, but also 12 plus 512 gigabytes, which is much better, especially when we see games take 10 to 30 gigabytes easily. And on this phone, I've taken 180 gigabytes just for the apps alone. And as far as pricing is concerned, it ranges from 230 to 300 bucks, which puts it very close to the POCO X7 Pro that I reviewed here. But if your focus is gaming, then I think Infinix is the real clear choice because you have a capacitive or touch shoulder triggers, perfect for those first-person shooters, and also at the top spec, you're getting the official gaming package with magnetic case and cooling fan, like I said, that doubles as a wireless charger. And you can pair this with the inbox 45 watts charger to unlock an extreme gaming mode, which supposedly lifts any thermal limits. But we'll talk about this in a bit. I just can't stress enough how I adore this wireless charging and cooling system that doesn't interfere with how you grip the phone. It also frees up the USB-C plug for wired earphones, which is also included in the box, and this is really my dream phone came true. But then I wasn't this excited when it launched earlier this year because the specs are not really cutting edge. The Dimensity 8350 chip, for example, while new, it scores 1.4 million in Antutu compared to 1.6 million on the POCO X7 Pro's Dimensity 8400. Same thing with battery, only 5,500 mAh compared to 6,000 with half the charging speed too, at least that's what the claim is. Then I reviewed the POCO and found it to be cool. I mean, like low temperature cool. I thought they won the race this year, but when I got this phone and unboxed it for the first time, that thought immediately disappears. I am willing to pay all those sacrifices for these gaming features I drool over from flagship gaming devices. And performance-wise, at least now we see in benchmarks, this is about the same as last year's Snapdragon 8S Gen 3, which is perfectly speedy. Even the disk speed test is within its spec range, though Snapdragon still has a huge optimization upper hand in browsing, as it generally scored much higher in Speedometer 3.1 compared to MediaTek in general. There is one notable feature that's dropped from GT20 Pro, which is the dedicated display chip, so you no longer get frame interpolation that, despite adding some additional lag, did run Genshin at 120 FPS or Honkai Star Rail at 90 FPS last year, which is pretty cool for a phone with under 1 million Antutu score. And I didn't really care about super resolution, but usually display chips help stabilize the frame rate and power consumption. The new GT30 Pro instead relies on raw power to chew through games. I've seen it consume upwards of 7 to 9 watts, even 10 watts peak, which drives up the temperature well above 45 degrees within the first 10 minutes. So if you want to game for hours, you definitely need the cooling fan, and you'd benefit from a stronger one like this FlyDigi B8X, though it doesn't wirelessly charge, so I use the kit one much more. Keep in mind, however, wireless charging is slow. Let's say about 3 to 5% increase per 10 minutes. As you know, the phone is constantly using 5 to 7 watts of power, so at least the battery is going up. So I usually recommend using it right from the start when the phone is cool, battery is almost fully topped up, so the phone stays cool and charged. And while we're here, let's talk about the 45 watts wired charging. I mean, It's enough, not too fast and not too slow. As you can see in the graph, it peaks at 30 watts but quickly stabilizes to around 20 watts. We get around 20% back within 10 minutes and around 60% in 30 minutes, which within the same time frame, that's about 10% less charge compared to POCO X7 Pro's 90 watt system. And I know the POCO battery is a tiny bit bigger, but in general, I think these are pretty comfortable charging times. Both fully charges within 60 minutes and have similar 20-ish watts average power. So you see, the difference isn't actually as big as the peak 45 watts versus 90 watts might suggest. What I really appreciate though is the temperature that maxes out at around 36 degrees on both phones, which is very cool. I would still say around room temperature level while charging in a 27 degrees air conditioned room. Again, this is very good for battery longevity. Although we don't have fancy silicon carbon material or high charge cycle rating, I would assume this battery would at least last 800 to 1000 cycles while still retaining 80% capacity, which is pretty normal these days. Now, diving deeper into real gaming performance, I'll now break down the results through Omaria Scene app, which is completely free. So it gives you more opportunities to do multiple rounds of testing and average the result instead of a strict 10-minute session with PerfDoc because I have to pay for it. So first of all, Wuthering Waves at max quality preset at FPS set to 60 nets you 42.8 average FPS. That includes farming in tested field, walking around in Arena Sita, and fighting open world enemies in Sea of Flames. And you can see the frame rate behavior is very typical of those without dedicated display chip. So it first tries to hit 60 FPS, which it can't really hit, so it fluctuates a lot. Then as you can see, after the first huge dip in the graph, which is a loading screen, we went to Arena Sita and start to see more stable 40 FPS and later around 37 to 35 FPS at the very end in Sea of Flames, fighting with enemies. And notice the temperature, we were at a blazing hot 47.6 degrees Celsius at the end. So my recommendation is to play at 40 FPS. You can keep it at quality preset and get relatively stable long-term performance, though you have to keep in mind the temperature. It does affect the FPS a bit once it gets up to 45 degrees and above. But if you use a cooling fan from the start, the phone shouldn't normally touch even 42 degrees, so it'll be smooth sailing from there. We'll talk about power figures and efficiency in a bit, which is a cool metric to compare between phones later on. And I hope you appreciate these breakdown because I tried to package it in a way that's relevant and easy for you to take in. But of course, let me know if you have any suggestions or even corrections. So your thumbs up would be much appreciated, and subscribe to not miss the comparison video to POCO X7 Pro as well. But yeah, moving on to the next game, Honkai Star Rail. I'd say this performs very well, averaging 54.2 FPS at very high preset with 60 FPS frame rate. It renders at the display native resolution and it performs above 45 FPS 93% of the time, with 5% of the time reaching down to a bit under 30 FPS, though as you can see from the graph, it's far from stable. We see a lot of big janks and frame time spikes, so my recommendation here is to reduce the preset to medium and still play at 60 FPS. Here you can see a much better graph with more controlled temperature, and I took it while playing the main Panaconi story with occasional fights here and there. It draws a pretty straight line with so much fewer big janks, though when walking on a map you still only get around 45 FPS, and again the huge dips are loading screens, so don't really mind those. Next up in the list, we have Genshin Impact, which apparently is still quite taxing. So at maxed out quality preset and 60 FPS frame rate, I've included a boss fight, doing daily quests in Sumeru, walking in Fontaine, and swimming underwater for a bit. And from the result, the graph is pretty good. Again, the big dips are loading screens, but we do see a lot of big janks once we go to explore the open world Sumeru or Fontaine with lots of different assets in play. Still, we're hitting above 45 FPS 92% of the time and ended up the test at 45.9 degrees Celsius. It's a generally good performing game, and it's also worth noting that Genshin has the lowest render resolution at only 864p compared to the other games. But if I remember correctly, Genshin always renders at that resolution. Now, last but not least, we have Delta Force, where I finally put some time in. It was a very fun time, especially with the shoulder triggers, and it can get taxing depending on your setting. When I try putting 120 FPS, the game unfortunately does not run at 120. So I tested with 60 FPS instead, because usually with shooter games you want more stable and high frame rate rather than more graphic quality. And rightly so, we got 57.7 FPS average, where 94% of the time hitting above 45 FPS. And if it doesn't, it goes down to 30. This switching between 30 and 60 FPS behavior is good because it doesn't create erratic frame time jumps. As you can see in the graph, it maxes out at 50 milliseconds only. Afterwards, it goes back to the normal 16 to 33 milliseconds range, which is the normal time a frame takes within a second. And for the first time ever, we ended the test with a nice and cool 40.2 degrees Celsius, and it's pretty much stable. As you can see at the end, it doesn't go up anymore. Now, if you like to play at higher quality graphics, I did try the highest it could go, which is max graphics and 40 FPS. And as you can see, it's still very much stable with dips only to 30 FPS, resulting in an average 39.1 FPS. Temperature also didn't raise from the 40 degrees Celsius before, maxing out at 40.7 degrees, although frame time variance is a tiny bit higher in this test. Honestly, you can play on either settings just fine. Both are free of small or big janks. It's just unfortunate that we cannot do 120 FPS even with extreme gaming profile unlocked with the cooling fan. Okay, now let's talk about power figures. And basically, Wuthering Waves uses the most power. Naturally. On average, it uses 7.1 watts at peaks up to 10.9 watts, where Honkai Star Rail and Genshin uses similar 6.5 and 6.8 watts. And here we can see the phone thermal capacity hovers around 6 watts. So that's why you see Wuthering Waves continues to rise in temperature compared to Hoyo games that goes around 45, 40 degrees. It's a little bit slower increase. Then, as you can see, Delta Force is running completely fine at 40 degrees Celsius because it only uses 5 watts on average. If we divide the average FPS to the average power consumed, we'll get this comparison graph. While Infinix is the least efficient in Wuthering Waves at 6.1 FPS per watt, but it pulls ahead in Honkai Star Rail that somehow was capped at 41 FPS on the POCO X7 Pro, as well as Genshin and Delta Force, although we have to gather more data to have more comparison points here. Okay, now here we are, a few notable things that you need to know while I share my camera shots with the GT30 Pro. First of all, the new camera system is so much smaller, and it's all that matters. One ultra wide, one main lens. The main sensor is bigger than the previous GT20 Pro, but unfortunately it loses OIS this time around. So you really feel it in indoor or dim lighting conditions. Your shots won't be as sharp, especially when taking photos of moving animals or kids. But talking about the ultra wide, while not the best in low light again, actually in bright light, it is consistent in color to the main lens. It takes really nice shots, and I still appreciate it being there. It can also autofocus for macro shots, which is pretty cool. And most importantly, what I love about Infinix is their color science, because for a budget gaming phone that is, they take one of the best shots, and I would take these any day compared to the POCO. If you know it, you know it. Front-facing camera isn't too bad either. It doesn't have the front-facing flash we get from previous generation, but I personally didn't use it too much, and all lenses can shoot at least 4K 30, with back camera maxes out at 4K 60. Keep in mind, however, that 4K 60 isn't quite as smooth as 1080p 60. There are still some jitters while panning, but stabilization is pretty good. So let's check out the video samples right now. Right, welcome everyone to the camera test, and right now we're starting off with a vertical video test just to see what the quality will be like if you're recording video with the camera to upload to Instagram story. And this is what it would look like. We're recording now in 4K 30 FPS. Okay, and here we are now recording with 1080p 30 FPS. What do you think of the sound quality, the colors and everything like that? Also the video stabilization, because that's very important. And you don't get that with any iQOO phone, to be honest. I just realized that lately. But yeah, let's switch over to the back camera right now. I want to showcase you the dual video feature of the Infinix GT30 Pro here. What do you think of the video quality? And interestingly, I don't see any video stabilization going on here. Alright, so here I'm now recording with 1080p 30 FPS. What do you think of the video quality panning around like this? That's 1080p 30 again. Let's switch over to 4K 60. Alright, there you go. This is 4K 60 FPS. What do you think of the video quality? So far, the video stabilization works very, very well. If I stay like this, that really locks in, which is very, very interesting. So let's see if I walk around and we'll see how the video stabilization holds up. Unfortunately, this is all electronic stabilization, so there is no OIS at all with the main lens. And this is the best we can go with the ultra wide lens, 2K 30 FPS. Unfortunately, the quality is just so different compared to the main lens, so yeah, let's forget it. Alright, last but not least is the new XOS 15, which is their take on Android 15. I'm neutral about the new control center that looks so much like iOS now, but I'm very glad that they added capability to remove multiple screen icons at once, something that bothered me a lot last year. Also, now you can set a hard charge limit, let's say at 80% to prolong battery life. You can still do bypass charging. The sidebar now shows you recent files and a smart hub where you can temporarily store files to move around. Not to forget, there's dynamic bar that works like iPhone Dynamic Island for calls, music, timer, and so much more. I think that's very useful. And the phone is plenty fast for multitasking and general use for years to come. It has great feedback, and similar to iQOO, apps are still open even after switching between 3 to 4 apps at the same time. And also, I can play Honkai Star Rail while doing other stuff just fine. It doesn't lag or even crash like the iQOO Neo 10, just maybe gets hot at max settings. Also, the LED lights at the back can notify you for calls, charging, or any incoming chats, though it doesn't have as in-depth customization as Nothing phones. Also, the dark flare version has RGB light strip instead of white in other colors here. And finally, we got IR blaster and multifunction NFC that can copy access cards and even read e-money balance in Indonesia. I have no complaints for the screen or the overall build quality. The bezels are pretty much symmetrical, top, bottom, left and right. And also the phone itself feels great in the hand despite having plastic sides and back. The front is a completely flat Gorilla Glass 7i, so screen protector will be very easy to install, and you get one applied from the factory. And not to forget, the included matte gray case here is very nice. It has a little bit of glossy parts here that helps with grip. Unfortunately, the phone itself doesn't have magnetics inside, so you will have to use the gaming case to use any magnetic accessories. Just maybe if I could nitpick, it's the camera bump that still makes the phone rock on table even with the case on, or the slippery sides with the gaming case on here. And speaking of this gaming case, it doesn't have that fancy vapor chamber material that transfers heat from other parts of the body to the center. This time it's only a metal plate, but you know, it works and gets the wireless charging going as well, so it's a net win in my book. So did I convince you to get the GT30 Pro yet? Let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget to use the affiliate links. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Kenneth, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.